Hello, and welcome to Shrink, the podcast for the mind. I'm Philippe and I talk to the people who want to have a better understanding of their issues with weight and body image. I want to start this recording by once again thanking you, all of you who are listening to my podcast. It's something I do at zero cost and I don't make any money out of it, but I truly hope that it can help some of you feeling better or finding ways of feeling better. And anyway, that means a lot to me, knowing that you're there and you're listening to that podcast. And there's more and more of you each month, so that's a really nice feeling. Not just for my ego, it's a nice feeling also because I feel like this world is a bit wild sometimes, the world that we live in now. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and if I can help, even a tiny bit, I've achieved my goal, really. So once again, thank you. So this episode will be about overeating and overeaters, and helping you finding out what kind of overeater you are. But before we do that, I think it's important to understand what that word means. An overeater is someone who eats more food than her or his body needs, and sometimes to a point where they will be uncomfortably full. The overeater knows this damages her or his health, but they are trapped in this pattern. Overeating is a complex and multifaceted behavior that can be driven by various psychological, physiological, and environmental factors. Understanding the different patterns of overeating can provide insights into how to address and manage this behavior effectively. So let's explore the various overeating patterns, their characteristics, their underlying causes, and potential strategies for change. The first pattern will be emotional eating. It's something I've talked a lot about previously in my podcast or in my book. In fact, emotional eating is eating in response to emotions rather than hunger. Common triggers include stress, anger, boredom, sadness, anxiety, loneliness. There are so many different emotions that can trigger emotional eating. And usually it involves consuming comfort foods that are high in sugar, fat, and calories. The main causes of emotional eating are emotional regulation, which means using food as a way to manage or cope with negative emotions. It's what we call negative emotions, but when I'm seeing clients, I don't define them as being negative. It can be sadness, it can be anger, for example. They're not, you don't feel good when you're sad, you don't feel good when you're angry, but somehow these emotions have something to tell us. So yes, emotional regulation is one of the main causes. But it's also seeking the pleasurable feelings that certain foods can provide as a reward system, let's say. And then there are the learned behavior, developing a habit of eating in response to emotions over time. So let's say when you were sad as a child, your mother would maybe, or your father, but usually it would be more your mother, I'm not blaming them for that, would tell you, hey, come on, don't cry and have a biscuit, or don't cry, have a licorice. That was what I would receive when I was expressing my sadness as a child. Another pattern of overeating is binge eating, which means somehow consuming large quantities of food in a short period, often to a point of discomfort. It's feelings of loss of control during the eating episode, and episodes that are typically followed by feelings of guilt, shame, and distress. So what are the underlying causes for binge eating? Well, it can be low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, or past trauma. But it can also be dieting and food restriction. If you've been dieting for a day or for a week or a month, well, that can trigger a binge eating episode because somehow you feel frustrated, you feel deprived, you feel like you didn't get the food that you used to have. For sure, dieting can be a trigger for binge eating episodes. Another overeating pattern is what we call the night eating syndrome. It's something which I've come across quite frequently in my practice, but I don't read many things about it in the press, or I don't hear about it much in social media. And it's a fact. In fact, it's consuming a significant portion of your daily calories after dinner or when you wake up at night to eat. It's often associated with insomnia and other sleep disturbances. The people who suffer from night eating syndrome usually have a misalignment of the body's internal clock with normal eating patterns. It's like having circadian rhythm disruptions. But it can also be caused by stress and mood disorders. Higher levels of stress and mood disturbances are common in individuals with night eating syndrome. Sometimes, and something I'm not very familiar with, but I've read about this in the scientific literature, it can have genetic factors, family history of night eating syndrome, or similar eating behaviors. Another pattern is compulsive overeating. It's persistent and uncontrollable eating behaviors. Eating in response to emotional, social, or environmental cues. It often leads to weight gain and associated health issues like diabetes or cardiovascular disease. What are the causes of compulsive overeating? Well, it's usually emotional distress. It's when you use food to cope with negative emotions. Again, it's what we call negative emotions, but I don't think they are negative. I think they are emotions which are really important. They're not very pleasant, but they have something to tell us. But one of the causes can be habit formation. Overeating becomes somehow a habitual response to certain triggers. Another common pattern that I see with people who are overeating is the ones who are alternating between periods of strict dieting or food restriction and episodes of overeating. And it's often associated with feelings of deprivation during dieting, and it's leading to compensatory overeating. The mindset of deprivation can increase cravings and the desire to overeat. Also, the body's natural response to perceived starvation is increased hunger and food intake. So your body doesn't like it when suddenly you start depriving it from the amount or the kind of food it usually has. It takes time for your body to get used to it. I must say that social pressures really don't help in this matter. There is such an emphasis on dieting and thinness, and it can contribute to a cycle of restriction and overeating. Grazing is another pattern for overeaters. It's the frequent consumption of small amounts of food throughout the day, often without planned meals, and it can lead, of course, to consuming more calories than intended. You can be grazing for different reasons. It can be a habit. Continuous snacking can become a habitual behavior, for example. But it can also be emotional factors that trigger it. Grazing can then be a way to manage your stress or your boredom. Social eating is something I've encountered quite often with my clients. It's when you're overeating in social situations, such as parties, gatherings, or dining out with someone. The social pressure or norms can influence the amount and type of food consumed. For example, if you're invited at someone's place and you may feel like you have to finish your plate because they invited you and they spend some time preparing that food, and same goes, let's say, if you're on a date and you're not really hungry but you feel like it's not nice not to eat if the other person is eating because they may feel uncomfortable if you're not eating and they're still eating. Anyway, that's what I would call the social pressure. And it really affects you more if you want to make sure that you're fitting, that you fit in the situation and you don't want to appear rude. And for some people also, associating food with pleasure and celebration is a big thing. It's like if they're not eating or overeating, they're not really having fun. they're not really celebrating with the other people that they're with. Mindless eating can be another cause for overeating. It's eating without awareness, and it's often while distracted by other activities like watching TV or scrolling on Instagram or working. And it can, of course, lead to overeating because you're not really attentive to your hunger and your fullness cues. And then the ninth and last cause, trigger for overeating. I say the last, but there are others. There are many others probably, but I want to keep it kind of simple because I know that some of you are on holiday and they just want to have a good time, and I think that's what they should do. And others are not on holiday and they're frustrated for it, like me, and they don't want to be overloaded with all this information, I guess. But yeah, the last one is habitual overeating. It's eating regularly more than necessary out of a habit. And it often involves established routines or rituals around foods. So somehow you get used to eating automatically, to eating whatever portion is being served to you. And nowadays, it's not unusual to be served large portions when we go out. And in fact, even when we are cooking for ourselves at home, it's out of a habit, we tend to eat more without even asking ourselves, am I hungry? Yes or not? Should I stop now? Yes or not? Because I'm not hungry anymore. And it's also a way to use food as a primary source of comfort and pleasure. So I've been through the main overeating patterns. As a reminder, there is emotional eating, binge eating, night eating syndrome, compulsive overeating, restrained eating, and then overeating as a consequence, grazing, social eating, mindless eating, habitual overeating. So yes, there are quite a few overeating behaviors. And for each of these behaviors, there are different triggers. And sometimes some behaviors overlap each other. So you're not just dealing with one behavior, with one overeating behavior, but with more than one, sometimes with 2 or 3. So why am I saying this? Well, that's the aim of this podcast, is to stop you feeling guilty for that. You're not overeating because you're greedy. You're not overeating because you love food that much. No, you're overeating for different reasons. And I hope by listening to my podcast, you can stop feeling guilty about the way you eat and find other ways to tackle this.